Hello, everybody. It is great to see you all, and thank you so much for the day. I'm excited to lead one of our next panels, and I will introduce all of our panelists in just a minute. But I first want to take a word and reflect on what we've seen so far today. We've listened to professionals, we've listened to educators, not just navigating an industry which is difficult to tackle. I mean, all of us know that the music business is this constantly shifting thing. And actually, Portia, in her conversation just earlier today, I think said soul crushing. And I got my pen like soul crushing, remind students.
Yeah.
But what I think is special today is so many of the education presenters this morning and so many of our conversations have been focused on here's how we can improve things. Here's how we can move forward. Here's how we can help each other, our colleagues, our industry, our students. So it's that sense of optimism that I'm excited to talk to our panel today. And this panel is supported by the Recording Academy, without whom this event could not happen. You'd think that on the surface, launching a digital event, well, it's free and it's technology and our platforms are free. While much of it is, it does take time. It takes coding to be able to communicate in Zoom, stream in Vimeo. Slack is back channel support. So thanks to the Recording Academy for their support and all of our other sponsors. Just to let you know, we had a great conversation this morning between Joe and Portia talking about this evolution that we've seen. And I think in many ways, this conversation today is going to jump off that. And both Joe and Portia struggled with, identifying, is it better now? What has changed and what is this future? And I was going to lead today saying, well, this is exciting. The fact that you can have a $500 interface mimic what used to cost $1 million, that's exciting today. That democratizes technology. But as we all know, it leaves a lot of challenges. I liked Portia's analogy of releasing music is like throwing a rock into the ocean. Not a pond, not a puddle, it's the ocean. And how big can your ripples have an impact? So I'm incredibly honored today to have three panelists who I think will be well-versed and insightful in helping us sort of look through answering this question as where are we going and where are our points of excitement. On today's panel, we have Kim Rosen, who's the founder and owner and main operator behind Knack Mastering. I don't want to go too long into people's bios, but quite frankly, Kim, you've soundtracked half of my favorite records of the last decade. Amazing records from Rhiannon Giddens, Joe Henry, Amy Mann, so many others. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll have you on camera in just a second. Also, we have Carl Kokayi Walker. And Carl, I have to say, researching this conversation, I started pulling up your records, and your musicianship, your empathy, your lyricism is fantastic. You're a Grammy-nominated artist, and we're really excited to bring that artistic musicianship side to the equation. And we're also joined today by Maureen Droney, who many of you met this morning when she presented on behalf of the Recording Academy. Maureen has a storied career in recording studios, producing with some of our biggest luminaries in the business, and today is the executive director of the Producers and Engineers Wing at the Recording Academy. I think let's start out real quick. I want to tag with you, Kim, to talk about this evolution of where we're at. I have a really basic question. Could you remind for everybody, what is mastering, if there's some academics in the room who aren't as used to the recording environment?
Yeah, so mastering, to put it as simply as possible, is just taking finalized mixes and adjusting the volume, the tone, the dynamics, adjusting either in very small bits, or you can have a heavier hand, and then preparing all the particular files for various formats. So streaming, CD, vinyl, they all have a different way of being prepared, a different type of file that you send. And so we kind of coordinate all that. So it's a little bit creative, a little bit technical, and it's a really great blend for me personally of the music industry. And mastering has also changed a lot since it first started. I mean, mastering at its inception was basically just taking an analog tape and cutting it to a vinyl record. that was the mastering engineer. And from there, and with technology, so much has changed.
Well, I think interestingly, even for this conversation, your role puts you in a really unique vantage point. You're seeing projects as they near the end of their creative workflow. And so I'm wondering, what do you see from that 30,000-foot view? We talk about this democratization of technology. Are your clients working more and more from home, or is there still quite a bit of work that's happening in larger commercial rooms?
Well, a great thing about these days is that mixing can really take place individually. So from a mix engineer's standpoint, it's a lot easier to have a remote rig that you can mix and do, but there's really, really no replacement or no supplement for live recording. That requires people getting together. As far as the kind of work that I get, I would say about 20% of it is really just DIY home studio. And then a larger portion of that is people really reaching out to smaller studios and getting someone to help them make their way through, recording their music. And then even on to big studios. There's plenty of that. But, in these days in the pandemic, it's much easier to have a smaller setup where you can just work alone. I don't like to make light of the current situation, but I did make a joke kind of early on that I've prepared my entire life for this pandemic, because a lot of the work I do is unattended and solo.
Right.
So I had the benefit of just being able to continue to work where a lot of people did not. It's really, you got to be working together. So when you can't have that, a lot of work suffers.
Now, speaking of that workflow with your clients, I'm wondering about the level of projects you saw coming in. I remember when we were planning on, Maureen, you addressed this in your remarks this morning, we were planning on hosting this conference live in DC at the end of March. And I spent my university spring break on the phone with everybody from MEIEA, wondering hour by hour, are we actually going to pull this thing off? Are we going to have a live event? We ultimately made the decision to cancel, of course, and come here. What did you see in those immediate weeks and months of the COVID lockdown? Did you see a drastic slowdown in work? And then the second part of that question is, obviously, is it starting to pick back up now? Are people realizing, okay, we're in for the marathon, so more content and more projects have gestated and they're on their way?
Yeah, for me, initially, because a lot of the wheels were already set into motion on a lot of projects that were coming in and through, and majority of the work had been done. They were just waiting for approval or, final mix changes. Initially, the first couple months, it was really just business as usual. By June, I did notice that there were less people calling up and bringing projects through. It didn't disappear completely, but there is a lot of parts of the industry where it did. So, everybody's just trying to do the best they can. And as far as now, business is back to where it was. Like I said, it was really just the lull that month. I think the amount of virtual collaborating that's been going on has really saved songwriters and artists using technology to continue to find ways to get their content out there, which is really just a testament to how great we are at figuring stuff out, how great we are at just using the tools to keep doing what you kind of just can't stop doing, which is making music.
Well, I think that segs perfectly to Kokayi. I wanted to talk to you from that musician hat, and I know you wear a bunch of hats, and we're going to unpack that over the next few minutes here. But when I first landed on your Bandcamp page, I was seeing March, June, forthcoming in November. It looks like you've been busier than ever. And I'm sort of wondering, with the weight of the year, what was encouraging you to keep putting work out? Because I know, speaking to some friends, especially those who have, the smaller home facility that Kim was referring to, well, because of the weight of everything, they simply didn't feel inspired to create. What's driving you right now? Because I absolutely love what you're doing and it's inspiring.
Thank you. Similar to Kim, I prepared my whole life for this, right? Making music making music is never stopped. It didn't stop when I was on the road. It didn't stop when I was in my hotel room with a portable setup, making music, whenever I had any opportunity. The impetus behind the most recent work has been the civil unrest. So part of my story is part of what I do is telling the stories from the African American perspective and stories of the diaspora in innovative ways. And so it just, along with a global pandemic, there was another pandemic of racism and xenophobia going on that basically, informed me to say some other things. I'm here to use my voice and to use my abilities to get out a message. So there was no shortage of content in terms of that, in terms of being able to speak in the midst of this. And also at the same time, any projects that I was thinking about were in my mind. Like, oh, I'm not on the road. I'm not doing all this other stuff. I have time to focus. What sort of creativity, creative juices can flow at this time? It seems like the world is at a standstill. 80% of my revenue is cut from touring. That's how I made most of my living, is European tours with different types of musicians. So I'm in and out of the country most of the year. But now I'm home. So what am I going to do while I'm home? I could sit back and lament all the work that has been lost and look at this global pandemic and feel bad about it. And, my travels, consisted of, I'm going to travel from the living room to the kitchen, and from the kitchen to the state of the dining room, and to the country of my bedroom. Like, these were the options that I had. So I could either sit there and lament that, or I could get busy doing what I always loved doing, which was what gets me out of the doldrums, making a song. It has been catharsis and cathartic for me, making a song, listening to music, working on music, collaborating with friends. And I'm glad that you brought that up. We're all home. So for all of my friends that were home, I'm like, hey, remember the interface that you just bought? And remember this stuff that we were doing, so we were able to listen to each other's tracks, in a lossless environment. I think we need to go ahead and kick that up and start sending files that way and go over these sessions that we never finished.
So that was my next question to you is, so many of the live performances I saw on YouTube with you are big ensembles, and you have that ensemble feel in all of your records. So was this all remote sessions? Was this suddenly learning to shoot files back and forth? Or were you able to get into some bigger rooms early into the lockdown?
So the bigger room stuff had already been done prior to the lockdown. The great thing is that as a working musician and a person who, utilizes technology a lot, I'm used to sending files. I'm used to, my language is, you want 48:16 or 48:24. Like, this is the things that I say that will confuse other people, but this is how I talk, and this is the language that as creators, we've been using forever. And we've always been in the, what's the best way to share a file? You go hit me in a Dropbox, you're going to send a WeTransfer, you got limitations, you're going to do file mail, you can't go over 2 gigs. How you going to send this to me? You're going to stream it. How are we going to do it? So we get into this we've already been using this language, and this language has already existed. And so we just went back into our bag of, this is a language that I use with you Tuesday through Thursday normally, but now that we're home, let's get it in. And so I think that's pretty much what happened, is we just went back to doing the things that we've always been doing.
And that makes all the sense in the world. And this is a flash forward question. Part of what I want to pull out of you and your experiences is, how do we then go and empower students in the classroom next Monday? And so before I jump to Maureen for a question, Kokayi, should every musician understand the basics of file dynamics, DAW operation, and simple tracking?
Absolutely.
Right.
I think if you want to exist in this market, in this world, so I'm a musician. I love music. I grew up loving music. I appreciate music. I cherish music. And what happens if we talking to students, and if I'm talking to even my peers, what happens is we get involved in the music business and the technical things that surround the creativity, and then we lose hope. Right. And then we lose sight of what got us into doing it in the first place. So that passion, when you start pushing that passion through the business of music, sometimes we can lose that passion based on what the algorithm is doing for the day and how we feel about that algorithm treating our life, right? But I say, if you learn the business, if you learn to understand the business and you learn the technical things that are there, it keeps you well informed, and you can separate my love of music versus my love of this technology versus the love of the business.
Well, Maureen, I think this is a perfect segue to you, because the Recording Academy, and specifically the Producers and Engineers Wing, has made it a mission and a mantra to help artists and musicians with exactly these things: file formats, best practices, white papers.
Begging.
What are you all
files?
Right? Where are you all headed? What are some of the exciting initiatives that are sort of in front of you right now?
You know, first I want to go back to your comment about us sponsoring the MEIEA conference, and I just want to say how valuable I think MEIEA is. You know, I think it was quite some time ago. Some people who are here today may remember, but we did a conference with you in Nashville a long time ago, and then we kind of lost track of each other. And I'm so glad that we're back relating to each other and doing things together, because I think the idea of the music and entertainment industry educators association is a really good thing. So I just want to thank you for that and say we're happy to support it, because we know how important it is. So your question was, what are we working on lately?
How are those best practices changing? It's a two-parter, because I think what was really helpful and surprising is that early into COVID, you all were one of the first organizations to publish some guidance and suggestions for studios reopening. And I'm actually going to push this into the chat. If I've done my due diligence, I can pop it into the chat here. Can I do it? All right, that should be going out to the group now. You've spent your life in studios. You've spent your life in file formats. You haven't spent your life in infectious disease. How did the Recording Academy so quickly pull in some expertise to help draft those documents that really in some ways have helped get us back to work?
It's true. Like all of the work that we do, it's a collaboration, it's a community effort. And I actually was reached out to by a woman engineer in Nashville, at the same time as a studio owner in Texas, who are on our committees, reached out and said, we need some help. You know, we're working on our own guidelines. What can we put together? Because their states were opening up earlier, right? Texas and Tennessee. And as a matter of fact, the state of Tennessee ended up using our guidelines, because a lot of cities and states don't have any idea of the special needs of recording studios. You know, right? Why should they? They don't really know what they are or where to, what to compare them to. So what we did was what we always do, a lot of research. I talked to 20 or 30 studios around the country. You can see them, most of them listed, and the people that I talked to on the guidelines, we give credit to them, from Blackbird in Tennessee to Capitol, and where else? New York, Toronto in New York, Jungle City in New York. We also talked to a lot of the manufacturers who gave us links to cleaning instruments, to NAMM, which also has an effort going with this for musicians. And we talked to things like lighting companies, because UVA filters and UVA wands to clean things are a relatively new product. So we just put that all together from all the best sources we could. The other resources we have are the live production companies, right? As a matter of fact, a big help for us is Michael Abbott, who is the head audio engineer for the Grammy Awards, who also does a lot of big shows like The Voice and the presidential debates, things like that. And so he had a lot of information about what the unions and what the production companies were putting together in very strict guidelines for shows like The Voice to get back online. So it was an interesting process. It does need to be updated now. We did a quick update early on, but this came out in, I think it was in April. So it's time for a revision, but it will require going back to all of those people again and getting more information, because that's how we work.
Well, thank you for being a convener. And I actually wanted to read this to the group. And it was mentioned this morning, but by the close of fiscal year on July 31, Music Cares, the nonprofit foundation attached to the Academy, had served upwards of 26,000 clients and provided more than $23 million in direct assistance. This represents a 294% increase in dollars distributed and a 200% increase in the number of clients served prior to the earlier fiscal year. That's astounding. And then the Music Cares COVID Relief Fund specifically has distributed more than $19 million to 19,000 music people in need. On behalf of this group, thank you, because I think a lot of the people that probably benefited from that support and assistance are all of our graduates who are out there working and making the records that we love. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's important. And as you know, we've been very active in legislation about getting help for music people who are in general independent contractors, or a combination, which really threw the states with unemployment assistance, is a person whose living is made up of both W-2 and 1099 earnings, because the states weren't prepared for that at all. So still working on it, but yeah.
Well, now
keep the music playing.
We all are. Now a question to Kim. Kim, we already talked about, and you suggested that, thankfully, amazingly, work is back to where it almost was pre-lockdown, and that's exciting. But I think hearing from Maureen about how diverse their outreach has been to speak to people, I know talking with a major artist manager, we were debating, what's that moment when, the audience will feel compelled to go back in a room, to go back to a stadium, to go back to a show. And this manager pointed out to me, she explained, well, we shouldn't just think about the audience. When will the artist feel comfortable, the crew feel comfortable? And there really are some big issues. And knowing that you can work mostly remotely, there's still lots of communication. I'm wondering if you could sort of give us an overview. How are your clients feeling? How are your friends in your close community reacting to this, especially as we learn, we're likely going to be struggling with a variety of COVID-related issues through 21 before we have, a vaccine that can get out to everybody. How's your constituency feeling?
Well, a lot of my closest clients, like many other musicians, I mean, they make their money touring. So until it's safe enough to go back and do that, and they feel safe and crowds feel safe, they will suffer, to whatever extent, financially, and have to figure stuff out. How much of newly released music is going to do anything to help them? It probably won't. But out of the pandemic and the struggle and the stories and how everybody's living some kind of alternate life, I believe that great content will come out of this. Great emotion, great music to listen to. I believe there will be a surge, even if we're feeling a little bit of it now. But, beyond that, I mean, the pandemic is just, it's the live, man. And that's the biggest thing for musicians. It's just all live. And even when states are open up, is everybody going to flood back? I mean, you can do a virtual concert, and I know a lot of people are. And I think that's actually a really great point that's been happening. A lot of artists have been doing virtual shows, leaving a virtual tip jar so that really great fans can leave them, a couple bucks, some money, just to make something. I think that's one thing that makes me really happy to see. People want to engage. And however much we can do that now to maybe take our mind off of all the other struggles. I mean, that's what music has always provided for us. But everybody really, I know, you want to get back into that room. There is no replacing being in that room with that musician and hearing that music live.
Absolutely. And just for everybody that's watching and attending the conference this weekend, we will be speaking with Dana Frank, who is the executive director and president of First Avenue Productions, overseeing a variety of clubs here that also work to help found NEVA, the National Independent Venue Association. So we'll hear more on this very thing in the coming days. Talking about inspiration, talking about escape, talking about motivation, a question back to Kokayi. You have a whole bunch of asterisks after your name, and I think that's exciting. And you don't just put out records, you've put out theater productions, spoken word. I just saw your TEDx talk yesterday and shared it with some students. You seem to be very multifaceted with your art. And I'm wondering where that came from, and did that also give you a different set of outlets than maybe someone who is just thinking in the music headspace? Is that a way to work through some of these challenges, is to celebrate and work through some of the other talents and interests that we of creatives have?
Well, I mean, you know, a lot of those asterisks came because of necessity. You know, it wasn't what I wanted to do in the beginning, but it was something I had to do. Like, I started producing music because I got tired of asking people to make me music and then paying people that weren't interested in really trying to make music. So I was like, you know what, I'll just do it myself. I started doing cover designs when I got tired of asking people to make cover designs. I got, you know, you start to do these things as an artist if you know you aren't in a major label system. And then when I was in a major label system, I got mad because I was like, hold on, you know, if I'm out here at 7 a.m., you know, why is my A&R not out here at 7 a.m.? You know, I should, you know, who's doing the publicity and what do you do now? And what does that merch thing look like? And who's making the shirts? And so I learned all the aspects of it just out of necessity, not because I wanted to. Right. And I think that's an important thing to know. And then not being caught in one specific space, artistic space, came from doing a art show in London with an artist named Arthur Jaffa. And Arthur creates mashups of film. He's gotten famous from these film mashups. He worked with Beyonce. He was working with Spike Lee. But when he was working with Spike, he was all about making films. He was like, this is how I'm going to make my money. I'm going to direct this blockbuster movie. And that didn't happen. What happened instead was some of these mashup films that he was creating just for the fun. One of his friends took it to Art Basel in Miami and it blew up. And then he was all over the globe. So he was at the Serpentine in London. He was at galleries in Berlin. He's at the Met in New York. So all of these things happened. And he told me, he said, you know, I was looking this way for all my money to come. I was looking at films only to be the sole source. And I totally didn't pay attention to this other creative outlet. And so I think that's what's important, right? Is what do you do now? So Kim is absolutely correct. There's nothing that I live more for than being on stage. I love that. That's where I get everything out. I love the crowd. I love the energy. I love that exchange. But I have all these songs. And so where are they going to go? Who's going to get this work? Like, so I need to figure out who needs songs, who makes sounds. Mercedes-Benz has a sound design department. Somebody got to make the little blink blink that comes on when you turn on your blinker. Somebody has to do the bloop bloop when you back up. Like, those are spaces that you can use your music, right? It's not just going to be your song. It's going to be the bloop bloop. The bloop bloop might get you $40 million. Whereas what you think is your greatest hit got you 3. So you can't keep looking around. You know, I think as a musician and an artist, you have to think about the other spaces that you want to go. If you have kids, you might want to write some kids music. You know, that may not be your thing. You might be, you know, punked out, but what does kids punk music sound like? You know, have you explored that space? Have you tried writing a little book that goes along with the punk music, you know, so you can make it more palatable for the kid? What does Good Night Moon sound like, right, when you're thrashing? So that, for me, is a space that you can look into. And I think that if you don't limit yourself to just being this one type of person, you know, and you're not a monolith. Artists are not monolithic. You know?
Two things.
Jump in, Maureen, please.
Isn't he a motivational speaker as well, right? And you know what you're making me think of is Joni Mitchell painting her own album covers.
Right.
As an artist.
Right.
As a true artist like you are.
Yeah.
Well, and you all rock, because you're hitting on exactly the issues that I would hope we would unpack a little bit. Kokayi, this is an unfair question for one representative artist in the room, but we'll circle through the group and talk about it. Are we moving into, is it fair to say that we're moving close to a non-music business, music business, right? Are we entering a content industry, not the music industry, because it is so diffuse? And you're right, if touring is 80% and we lose that and we have to diversify, will this accelerate that, do you think?
So I saw this on Twitter the other day, and people were like, you should not expect an artist to be a content creator. And I'm like, it's a word, right? Content creator and songwriter is just it's just a fancy way. It's just like, people just rename things. It's not hip hop, it's, lo-fi. It's hip hop, right? It's just, punk music is hip hop with guitars. Let's stop playing. Like, this is what we're doing. So whether you look at yourself as a songwriter or a content creator, it's the same thing. Intellectual property. You don't look at your song as an intellectual property until somebody tries to steal it. And then the lawyer says, hey, they infringed on your intellectual property, right? So just stop. Don't get caught up in the nomenclature and just think about what it is. It's still going to be the business of music. You're still creating what you love. You're still creating music. If somebody says that's content, okay, get paid for your content or your song or whatever, I don't think the music industry is going to die because of COVID. And I don't think that we as musicians and creatives have to think any differently, right? You just have to think about, what else am I going to, the only difference I would say is, what else can I do with the things that I've already made or want to make? You have to look around at the full breadth of what this music industry is about. And I think, it's just like if I'm talking to any student, some students want to be Mick Jagger, right? Some students want to be Lenny Kravitz. Some people don't understand that the guy or the woman who tunes Lenny Kravitz's guitar might get paid way more than somebody who's sitting on the corner busking. I'm just saying, there's jobs in the music industry that you're not paying attention to, and you should think about those, as a way of being able to make it.
Well, this is exactly where we wanted to go, and to think about that job thing, and because we as educators try to think about, what's the outcome of our degrees, what's the outcome in the future of our students. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pass this on to Maureen. We'll keep cycling through. Maureen, the Recording Academy has been an advocate and an education resource for decades. And both Kim and Kokayi are talking about, and we all have all day today, are talking about this diffusion of potential for art. If all of our engineers are now also live streaming and such, from what you see, speaking to so many constituents, what are the skills that are more important than ever now to have a profession in audio?
Well, I think it's obvious, like what Kokayi said before, is that you have to know the technical skills, and you have to know them across a broad, probably not just Pro Tools, but Ableton and Nuendo as well, so that you can collaborate however we're going to be collaborating, which could be for a long time online. And I have to throw in right here that I certainly hope that we're learning how to improve how things sound that we hear online, because I have a fear that people are getting used to hearing things that don't sound very good, and I always worry about that because I know how hard people work to make things sound great. So, but we're getting better at that. 6 months into this, we've learned a lot. As a matter of fact, we're working on a 3-part, and DC is involved in this, Kokayi, a 3-part series on streaming from home, recording from home, recording from a venue, streaming from a venue, on all the things we've learned in the last 6 months on the tools and the psychological issues as well. So I think soft skills are huge in the music business, just like maybe other places. I'm not sure, maybe more than other places. One of the things a Philly member got in touch with me about, and that will fit into this 3-part seminar, is working with an artist remotely Now, people are pretty used to mixing and mastering remotely. You guys have been doing that for a long time. But like I think Kim said, recording with a band, being in the room with a band is a lot different than being remote with a band. And Mike Klink, who was Guns N' Roses producer and still works with a lot of rock and roll bands, said to me early on in the pandemic, mixing's not a problem for me online. I've been doing a lot of it, but actually producing and not being in the room with people is difficult, and it's another art to learn. Communication has always been a huge element of being an engineer or a producer or an A&R person, right? I think not that communication isn't important in every industry. I think there's a rarefied communication skills that are developed with music people working together that will actually help you in all parts of your life, because you learn to listen. You know, you really learn to listen, and you know when to speak and when to leave the room, things like that. So soft skills, willingness. I wrote some things down because you had said that question. And I was recently on a panel where people in the crafts, these are people who are in the film and music crafts related to sound as well, said communication, empathy, being flexible. I always remember Jimmy Douglas, who's a famous engineer who's still working all the time, mostly in hip hop and R&B, but started out at Atlantic Records being an assistant for Aretha Franklin, when they were recording her back in the day. He says willingness is one of the most important things, one of the most important skills you can have, being willing to do what's needed to get the job done. And I think also a desire for excellence. You want to be really good. You want to stand out and be really good, because there's a lot of other people who are standing out and being really good. You can't be average, but you do have to be prepared in your life to do a lot of different things, I think, and hopefully you get pleasure from them. I'll just finish with that is one of the things in my life I think I've really been lucky with. When I was an engineer and an assistant engineer, I used to feel a little bit like a dilettante because I was always doing something else on the side, like managing a band or being the production coordinator for the project. And at that time, if you were an engineer, you were like really focused on the snare drum, just
right.
that.
Right.
But I like the other stuff. And in my life, it's proved, I've written a lot of books on and been able to interview great people. I've worked as a studio manager. I've worked in PR for audio companies. And I feel like I enjoyed all of them and got pleasure from all of them. And I ended up in a job that uses all of those skills and more.
Right.
So I think it's really important to have. You don't have to just focus on one thing. You have to be good at things, but you also have to be open to opportunities that may not be what you thought they were going to be.
Absolutely.
One more story for people, if you don't mind. We're running out of time. I don't want to dominate.
Please.
When I was working as an engineer, an assistant engineer, and a staff engineer at a studio in San Francisco, it closed, and I was freelance. And at one point, I got a call from a friend who had been the desk person at the studio, who was now running another studio for a producer. And she said, "I'm going on vacation. Would you come back and mind the desk and be the desk person?" Well, that was kind of beneath me at that point, because desk person was how you started, right? Night desk person was how you started. But I mean, I was an engineer. I'd worked on records that won Grammys, but I wasn't working at the time. And so I said, okay, why not? And a producer came in who knew me from the other studio, saw me working behind the desk and say, "Hey, what have you been doing?" And I became his engineer for 5 years, and it was just, I took that step back. It wasn't that bad. It was going to fill my time. And it turned out to be, synchronicity or serendipity, or one of those words. So I think you have to be open to opportunities.
Absolutely.
Well, I've got a couple questions for Kim. Two-parter here. I want to start with, I think what's interesting is we've just heard from Maureen and Kokayi talking about diversity. You demonstrate that too. You're not just a mastering engineer, you're also a manufacturer. How did that decision come about? Because yes, you use gear every day, but just like Maureen having to jump into, infectious disease, you're having to jump into the complexities of manufacturing and distribution and retail. Could you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, I think that willingness that Maureen was talking about, that really it's not even something that you need to have if you're dealing with a pandemic. I think that's across the industry, that willingness, resourcefulness, ability to troubleshoot is really, important. That drive to want to learn different elements. It's a natural thing. It's almost part of your character. You can learn, you can grow to become more like that. But I think that's something that is in most people. It's easy to acclimate to, any job in engineering if you have that type of character. But as far as starting a gear company, it really just started as an idea with my husband. He has experience with manufacturing in China. He works for a bicycle company, but he was a musician when he was younger. And we came up with the design for a custom piece of gear for me. And, that being open, we're telling our friend about this piece of equipment that we want to design. And he happens to be a distributor, our very good friend, Gil Griffith. And he was just like, yeah, no, you should make that and sell that. And so we were like, okay. And just took that step into it. We really were just naive enough to think that, hey, even if it takes us a long time to pull it off, let's do this. Let's go on this adventure. Let's put some of our love and energy into this. And it was a lot. It took us we started developing it in 2012 and brought it to market in 2018. So, both working full-time jobs and then collaborating on that, working with a electrical engineer on the design and getting the prototype. It's really my husband's experience in that manufacturing part and design that made us able, as like kind of small fries, to jump into the manufacturing industry, because it takes a lot of time, a lot of care. Well, for most people, it takes a lot of care. If you care, it'll take a lot of time to get it right. And we just made sure it was. So, it's the same thing. So I'm in a different industry than my husband, but he has that same component where he's like in everything, learning about everything. He does web design. He does graphic design. I think that being part of your character and being able to, just follow those leads. Back to opportunity, one of my favorite quotes is, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Luck doesn't just happen. You have to be prepared. You have to be educated, knowledgeable, so that when that opportunity comes, you can take a step in that direction.
Your mic's off, Scott.
Thank you. The 8-year-old was being loud, so I muted myself for a second.
I have one of those too, an 8-year-old.
So yet so loud. Kim, so you just spoke to the willingness and several of the other traits. I wanted to ask you specifically about the communication. You joked early on, you've been preparing for this your whole life. I'm wondering, through all of this, what have you learned that we can pass on to students about communication? Because I know a lot of my students are this over mobile devices and the worst grammatical emails I've ever seen. That can't be adequate to talk through the intricacies and subtleties of a mastering job. Are you phone-based? Are you Zoom-based? Do you stream the content out for listening and then make tweaks in real time? What have you learned about communication?
So my communication really hasn't changed. I'm mostly email because for convenience sake, even clients, a lot of times it's just, you can either answer faster or, they can answer at 1 a.m., whereas we might not get on the phone at 1 a.m. But I love a good phone call. I mean, there's no better way to cut through the gray area than to get on the phone. Communication is king, man. There's nothing worse than misinterpreting something or taking something the wrong way. You really have to be present. Good engineering, great musicianship, it does not happen by accident. You have to be present with that. So, being distracted by phones, I mean, I started engineering, there were no phones, nowhere near the way it is now, but now there is. And so even I find myself having to practice, like, just putting stuff down and putting it away, and not just for work, but for my life. There comes a point when when you personally recognize the changes in yourself, how you interact, and you think about this simpler time, back in 2002 when there weren't smartphones. And what did people do? They sat around in silence. Yeah, maybe, probably. Or they had a conversation, or they were paying attention to, nature or someone else talking, So my communication has not changed much, but really it's just about being present, and really trying to understand, because there's a lot that can happen when you're trying to describe what you want to hear, especially when it comes to mastering. So lots of adjectives used. You might not be speaking the same thing and thinking you are, which is when phone calls are just really great.
All right, I'm going to make assignments where students have to phone it in somehow.
Hey.
Kokayi, before we open it up to questions from the audience today, you already talked about this summer's unrest, and we couldn't have a discussion about this industry, about art, if we didn't address that. Being from Minnesota, I watched my city burn this summer, and so your music has a very explicit activism, advocacy, and message. And I'm wondering, as we're all problem solving right now, we're all addressing the COVID crisis, we're addressing the unrest. Are we moving in the right direction, do you think? I mean, what's encouraging you to put the art out there that says the right thing? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't look at it as the right or the wrong thing, right?
Right.
I just think about it as what I feel like I need to say at that moment. Activism isn't, what I do is happy, sad songs. I do happy sounding, really sad songs. They sound one way and then you're like, oh, wow. And until you start looking at the lyrics and you're like, oh, it's not so happy. But I don't look at myself as an activist in that way. I feel like I have something to say and I'm going to say it, right? And at this time, I don't look at, as artists, I think the only thing that you have the responsibility of doing is being able to communicate, like Kim was saying. I think that's your responsibility, is communicating. Whatever that truth is for you, that's for you. And you obviously will find an audience that agrees with it or it resonates with, or you won't. I think the direction that we're moving in, if we talk about a direction of empathy and understanding and clarity, which I think 2020 has definitely brought to everyone, is some clarity about who people are, what their intentions are, where do we stand as a country? Where do we stand as individuals? How empathy really, really means something, and being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and being able to understand plights of other individuals. I think it has opened us up to being more sensitive as a people. Even the pandemic has had everybody saying, okay, I'm going to make a choice. Am I going to infect you, or am I going to, make sure that you're okay? Or am I going to think about myself and I don't feel like putting this thing on and I'm gonna cough in your face or whatever, right? So I think that, these things are starting to inform us as a type of society we are. Societies that we would look down our nose at, or call a certain name. What do we, as in effect, what have we done as a society in response to something that required us to be our own, to look out for our neighbor? Right? The things that we as a country espouse to other people about how we're supposed to operate, when it came time for us to put that into action, what did we do? And that's our responsibility. So what are we doing to make sure that we leave this place better than it was before? And I think as an artist and a musician, you can only just tell your story. I don't look at it as a right or wrong thing.
Well, you said that so well, and you answered what I should have worded the question better as is, if you have something to say, what is it that we as educators need to say in the classroom? And you did answer so many of those things. And I want to open this conversation about empathy also to Maureen and Kim, because there are just as many concerns outside of racial division, misogyny, and gender issues in the workplace. And
absolutely, how
can we as educators better prepare our young people to be allies and also to be bold to follow their dreams? Maureen, Kim, Kokayi, any words on any of those?
I don't want to dominate, but agency is tantamount, right? And so, you know, Maureen knows that we've been talking about, you know, women in technology and women in music, and from producers and engineers to artists, having that equity and the stake in what we're doing. And even if we have to mandate that, like, agency is tantamount, making sure that people are encouraged to do so. And I think as educators, you don't keep a male patriarchal dominant, you know, idea when you talk about something. You know, when you talk about the technical aspects, we don't refer to it as all these guys. We don't think that the lighting people are supposed to be one gender or one race or whatever, right? But I think what we do hold on to is making sure that they're excellent, that everybody is excellent in what they're doing, and that they're able to, you know, communicate as best that they can, you know, that to your students. For me, as an artist, I'm like, yo, how can we make space? Because that's what we should be doing. And now I'm gonna shut up.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because I think that a lot of the work that's been done to make, you know, the industry more equal, a place where anybody really has a place. I think a lot of the work that's been done for the generations that are already in the industry is the harder work, and that the delayed gratification of seeing younger generations, like, they're already starting to be like, what do you mean there's an issue? What do you mean I can't be this or that? But we as adults, it's just taking longer for us to see them kind of swell in every year and fill those shoes and spaces with that really common, equal ideology, which is what we're trying to kind of retrofit into the industry that already exists. You know, I think that's harder work. I think, you know, I've talked to tons of teenagers and my own kids, like, everybody can do anything, you know, really breaking down a lot of the boundaries that existed when we were young and deciding what we wanted to do. So
I think part of those boundaries were role models, you know,
Yep.
and they didn't exist, and now they're starting to. And so things will change, are changing.
We're just about out of time, and I want to see if there's questions from the group. But as we are preparing to wrap up today, I'm wondering what else each of you are excited about. I mean, I think this is one of the things that the weight of the year has impacted so many in so many different ways. What's a bright spot that you're focusing on? What's a point of optimism that you have looking into this next time period? What's keeping you going, and how can we can go back and celebrate with our classrooms?
I can tell you what keeps me going is our members, and our producer and engineer members are what keep me going. They're the best. They're just people who work together kind of selflessly on projects that are going to better the industry. And they do it for free. They take their precious time, and you guys are both on committees. You give your time to make a better industry, and your passion and your love for this work, and knowing that what you do is important. Music really is the universal language, along with food. And it really matters more than ever right now. I mean, what's brightening your day? If my staff is listening, they've heard me say this over and over again, but Joe Walsh is hosting a radio show he calls on Saturday night that started during the quarantine, right? You know who Joe Walsh is. He was the guitar player he is the guitar player in the Eagles and the James Gang before that. He's someone with a really distinctive voice and a very big heart. And it's like Franklin Roosevelt with the fireside chats when he comes on, and he was calling it, I think it's Saturday. It's on a public radio station from 6 to 8. 88.5 if you can get it. I think it's online. And he plays all sorts of music, which for some reason surprised me. I don't know why. I mean, he's a musician, right? And great musicians like all kinds of music. And what he says about him, he'll say about, like he said about War on Drugs, they make great records, you know? And I love that aspect of it, of recognizing a great record. You know, what went into it. So those are the bright spots for me, the music that he plays and the inspiration and how it really brightens my day. And knowing that that's what we all do, you know, that's what you're doing by creating music and bringing people together. So.
Kokayi, Kim, 30 seconds from either of you before we wrap for today.
Yeah, I like what Maureen said about, you know, really just loving all music. I think that's a really important thing for students to understand. This is a perfect time to give yourself a real heavy musical education, because just as important as learning the technical aspects of engineering, a DAW, you know, how to record, it's really important to, I mean, listen to as much music as you can, consume it. That will help give you a really great foundation of creating your own sound, you know, but having that in the background is super important. And I'm also looking forward to everybody remembering the first live show they went to post-COVID. And that being like a really big thing that everybody, you know, later in their life talks about. The first show I saw after everything was shut down was, I think that'll be pretty cool.
Yeah. Kim, I can tell you what, my last one was John Prine. How about that?
Holy cow.
I know. Kokayi.
Wow.
So I'm looking forward to the first show that I can perform after this thing. And what keeps me excited is the range of new music that has been coming out. Like, people are making all kinds of nutty music, and I love it, you know. And I just say for students, just like, don't limit yourself to anything. You know, like Kim was saying, listen to everything and then feel like you can make everything, right? Don't just hop in one box and be like, oh, it's what I do. It's like, nah, you can do whatever you feel like you want to do. If that means you know, tapping out rhythms on a matchbox, you know, playing with a puppy paw, go for it. Like, you know, you and your dog got to duet. Let's do it. Like, you know, get it in. And then videotape it and put it up, right? Don't record it and post it and then create that content or whatever. Like, just go have fun. That's the other thing too. Don't forget that, and you know, as much as it is a music business and that all this pressure's on you, if you ain't having no fun, you ain't doing it right.
Well, all of you talked about excellence and greatness today. Thank you for being excellent musicians, engineers, and advocates for all of us. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Peace.